everyone, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create. Today I'm going to work on the base mini album that you guys have seen in the Imagine 8x8 mini album that I created about a month ago. So this album, or this effort, is going to be essentially that mini album, just the base book. And then I'm going to release a second video which will cover all the flaps, the inserts, and all the designer paper and how it actually gets laid out on the album. So this is just a basic 8x8 pocket page hidden hinge album. So what you're going to need is you're going to need some score tape and an ATG gun if you like. I actually prefer the tape, but for some of you that's more economical. Paper clips so that I can temporarily adhere things. I use a straight edge. I'm constantly measuring and remeasuring. Measure twice or multiple times, cut once. I like to use an X-Acto knife. This is a pick tool used mostly for my silhouette, but I like to use it to peel the backs off my double-sided tape. A couple of pairs of scissors, one for fussy cutting, one for straight cutting, and a bone folder. So with that, I'm going to get started. So again, this is an 8x8 mini album, and when I say that, that's the actual size of the pocket page. The actual cover and the spine, the cover is going to be 8.5 by 8 1/4. And that way you have a little bit of give on either side of the pocket page. And if you have an 8.5 and I have a pocket page, if I do an insert and anything hangs over, it'll still be protected by the edge of the paper. So this is the size that you're going to want your chipboard. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to come back to this right now. What I want to focus on is actually constructing the pocket pages. So once the pocket pages are constructed, I'll come back and then we'll cover the book and then also do work on the hidden hinge. Okay. So here we go. So I've pre-cut everything so this video will go pretty quick. And if you looked at my previously on the mini album walkthrough, there is a cut list. And so you'll see some of those measurements, but I'm going to go over them as we go through and construct this. And I'm going to try my best. This is my first video to create banners so that as I'm doing the work, I'll run a banner across the bottom or the top indicating what the size of the paper is that I'm working with. So to start with, you're going to need 8 of these sheets. And this is 8.5 by 8. The 1/2 inch is going to be scored and taped, and then it takes 2 of these, and I've already pre-cut and scored these, and you lay them together, tape on opposite ends, so you'll have tape on either side, and then you adhere these together, and that is going to create the pocket page. You'll need 4 of these, so you need 8 sheets, scored at 1/2 inch on each one, 8.5 by 8, score at the 1/2 inch on the 8.5 inch side, and then we're going to stick these together. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and start peeling the tape and putting these together while you guys can work on either cutting or scoring and putting yours together. It takes a little bit of practice, but typically what I do when I'm putting these together is I try very hard to get one corner down extremely accurately while maintaining height on the rest of it so it doesn't jump onto the tape before I'm ready. And then it looks like I'm about, and then I've got some room to wiggle back and forth until I get it just right. Line it up. And there we go. So there's my first tape. This isn't a difficult step, but it is a little bit tedious, and taking your time here goes a long way to making a really clean mini album when you're finished. This is another technique I use where I'll pick up just part of the tape, and sometimes when you're working with 2 of these back to back, if you don't press through the center, you wind up with a pocket page that's kind of bowed like this. And that's okay, but if it's loose like this, sometimes the inserts will slip in and out a little too easily, so if you've turned the book on its side, something might actually fall out. So I usually adhere one side, press across, get a hold of that, peel off the rest, and then I've got a pretty good pocket page. Now it's bowed, but not as much as it could be. So this is where the hinge will be inserted, and then on the other side it remains open for you to provide an insert. And right now, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I cannot see what I'm doing from my camera, so I'm hoping for your benefit that I'm actually staying in frame. I'll do some editing when this is done, but I'm brand new to this, so I hope I'm staying in frame. It's too hard for me to get up and down as I go, so I'm gonna do this one a little bit different. I'm gonna take off just the corner, peel it back, make sure I'm aligned. Again, this is an 8.5 by 8, scored along the 8.5 inch side at a 1/2 inch. Okay, and that's the same thing over and over. We're gonna do that. This is number 2. We'll do 2 more after this, so that we'll have our 4 pocket pages. Now, if you wanted a 6-page mini album, you just continue to make these. It's pretty straightforward. Because I love flaps and pockets, I usually stick with 4 because I can get a lot of photos in my albums because I'm adding flaps instead of pages. Okay, so now I'm going to line up this end nice and tight, peel the paper, press it down. Okay, switch sides, go back to my pick tool, which I love, keeps me from tearing up my fingernails, which are so frail these days. I'm gonna fold that over, make sure the corner is nice and lined up, press it down, use my hand across the balance of the page, and then I've got my second pocket. Okay, as you can see, this goes pretty quick. It's not too bad. Couple more, and then I'm going to go into, once I finish this, I think I'll go ahead and score and prepare. It's not difficult, but it does take a little bit of time. Score and prepare the hinge. And a lot of the time working on the hinge is just getting all the tape down. All right. Nice and tight. Keep it even on both sides. I swing it, it's hard to see, but I swing it back and forth until I know it's just perfectly even. Come back and make sure that that corner is tight. Peel my tape, there we go. Okay, one more time on this side. So while I'm working on this, I'd like to keep chatting a little bit. I want to thank everybody who sent me comments on the original Imagine walkthrough. I had a really good time working on that. Building mini albums is one of my favorite things to do. So I really enjoy putting them together. Trying to do this on video is kind of a little bit of a little different for me, but I'm enjoying it. And I hope everybody enjoys and is able to use the tutorial as they're building their own books. I have watched lots of tutorials, and I'm hoping I've learned a few things along the way in terms of trying to keep everybody engaged and moving at a pace that's not too fast and not too slow. Okay, got that tight. Oh, you know what? I did that wrong. See, I got the tape out. So good thing I didn't press that all the way down. It needs to go this way. Again, I know I've mentioned it. I'll say it again. Each one of these sheets is 8.5 by 8, scored at 1/2 inch along the 8.5 inch side. And when you're finished, you wind up with an 8 by 8 pocket page. And you'll need a total of 4 of these for this mini album. And this is pretty basic. This is kind of the design I use as the bones for most of my mini album work. 8.5 or 8x8 is just one of my favorite. Now see, I took that all the way off and I didn't mean to. So I'm going to go back and add that on there so it doesn't jump up and stick to the paper before I'm ready. I'm going to press that corner down. Okay, so now we have 4 of these. So that's just perfect. So I'm going to turn these all on their side. I usually take a look, make sure that they're pretty square. Occasionally I'll be off, and sometimes if it's too much, I'll either make another one or I'll do a cheat and I'll just trim that edge so that it's nice and tight, especially if it's the edge facing out where the insert goes. So this straight edge is much more important than the one that goes on the hinge, because you can do a little bit to hide any mistakes that you have. Wait to put the pocket pages in last. Okay, a little bit of reaching going on. Okay, I've got my 2 sheets of 12 by 12 on my chipboards. This is medium weight chipboard. If you haven't already, you'll need 2 8.5 by 8 1/4 chipboards, and then the spine is 2.5 by 8 1/4. So top to bottom, I said that backwards, top to bottom, left to right. And then you've got your 12 by 12s. So I'm gonna pull these out and I'm gonna flip them around a little bit because I want to find out which way the grain goes. So the grain on this particular piece of paper is going this way. And if you see what I'm doing, I'm kind of testing the how easily it'll collapse on itself this way. You can also shake it to get that feeling. You want to make sure that your paper top to bottom parallel to the spine is actually going with the grain. This is going to be where you're going to be putting your scores. The cover gets the most activity in terms of flips and folds and opens, closes. So you want to make sure that you are actually laying down your book. There we go. So that top to bottom is going with the grain of the paper. I can't stress that enough. There's nothing more frustrating than putting dozens of hours into a project and then having your spine crack, like on my last project, because I wasn't paying attention and I was rushing. So take your time. There's lots of ways to kind of test this process, but typically you can tell which way it wants to go. So why does paper have a grain? Paper has a grain because the process making paper includes using water, and when they go to drain the water from the paper, the fibers naturally run in a line, and that's where you get the grain of the paper. It's not something they do, it's something that happens just throughout the process. So every piece of paper you ever have is going to have some kind of grain to it. So take your time and find that. To the extent that you can on other pieces in the project, if it's got a score line, take the time to find the right orientation. It'll save that, it'll make that spine or that score line functional for much, much longer. Okay, so because this is 8.5 by 8.5 plus the 2.5, I can't get it all in the 12 by 12. So I'm going to adhere these 2 pieces of paper together, and this will become the foundation for the cover of my book. So I don't stress too much about this being perfectly straight, because you're going to fold the edges over on itself anyway. So I did that backwards. I'm going to flip these over so you can see how I'm lining the tape up. I'm going to make sure I've got it on the... Okay. So I just adhere the corner. Don't have too much left over because you don't want the edge of this to be floating around on this. So you want the tape as close to the edge of this as possible. Otherwise, you got to come back through and run a stream of glue against it, which nobody likes to do. So I'm going to go as close to the edge of this and the edge of this as I can get without the tape being exposed. Okay, that's pretty straight. I'm going to line this up on my cut mat so that it's reasonably straight, and then I'm going to come across before I lay it down. There. Good enough. Okay, now I'm going to burnish this down. Okay, these two pieces of paper have now become the basis of the cover. Okay. So previously I had gone in and most people do 1 to 2 inches here. I just use the width of the ruler because I love quick shortcuts. Draw yourself a quick pencil line from the outside to the inside and up and down, and that's just to adhere your first piece, because once you get your first piece of chipboard down, you're going to line the other pieces of chipboard off this. So it's only important to get the first piece down reasonably straight. And once you do that, like I said, you're going to line everything else off this chipboard. Now what I like to do, if I can, you just saw me switch this. This has kind of a rough edge because this is the edge I cut. This is the factory edge. If at all possible, I like to move so that my factory edges are on the outside of the book. Any rough edges are on the inside next to the spine. So we're going to lay this out, just kind of dry fitting it, make sure that my paper is big enough and I don't have to add yet another piece of paper, and I don't. So it's all going to fit on pretty well. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pick up each one of these pieces of chipboard and I am going to put adhesive all over the back and get ready to lay these down. So that's what we'll do now. I'm going to use a little bit wider score tape on this around the edge, and then I'm going to come back and fill in the center with my ATG gun, just because it's a little bit more economical. I wish I was better at using it. Now, what did I do with my straight edge? I set my straight edge down. I can't find it. I have to use this. Okay. So I'm just going to go around and do the edge. I don't have as good of, because I'm left-handed, and the way the tape roll loads, when I'm pulling the gun as a left-hander, I can't really see where the tape's laid down. That's why I always go around the edge with score tape, because I can control exactly how close to the edge I get. Some people are much better at using that gun, or if you're right-handed, you have a better bird's eye view of where the tape is actually being laid down. So this isn't necessarily, it's not necessary. If you're right-handed and you can see what you're doing with that gun, that's definitely the cheaper way to go. Okay, so I'm going to go through and continue this process all the way around for each one of the pieces, and then come back and lay down that ATG. So, okay, top to bottom is going to be 8 1/4. Side to side, 8 1/2. Okay. And this is 2 1/2. The spine is 2 1/2. By 8 1/4. All right. Hard to know how I'm doing. I'm kind of anxious to see this video myself. And again, for your sake, I hope I'm staying inside the frame so you can actually see what I'm doing. Okay, Yeah, I'm going to burnish everything. It's kind of hard to do this after you lay the ATG down, so do it first. You can see I do my best to get as close to the edge as possible. Okay, last piece. Okay. All right, make sure these are oriented right. So I just went in and covered all my notes up. So I'm going to dash those down again. So we want an 8.5 from side to side, 8.25 from top to bottom. Okay. And let's double check that. Where is my ruler? Here it is. Make sure, yep. That is 8.5. That is 8.25. So I've got those oriented right. Okay, so next I'm gonna go and add my ATG, and then lastly I'm gonna peel it off, and we're gonna actually place these down. Once they're down, we are going to score the edges and fold them up, and then we'll have the cover for our mini album. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll cover the inside of the mini album with just basic black, and then we will oops, that didn't let go. Then we will add the hinge, and then we'll set that whole thing aside, and then work on finishing the pocket pages with the flaps and any pockets that we have. And I've got all that paper pre-cut, so it should go pretty quick. And I'm hoping you guys will have a chance to pre-cut, or if not, maybe you can pause. Okay, so here we go. So one more time I'm gonna check it, because there's nothing worse than laying down your chipboard in the wrong direction after you spend all this time getting everything ready. So I know it's 8.5 this way, 8.25 this way. Check, check, check. It's better to check again than to lay it down wrong and waste a 12 by 12 sheet. Okay. I'm going to double check. Now I didn't do that right. I told you this, but what I did when I laid the tape down, I should have been on the other side. This is actually the edge I cut, and this is the factory edge. So I'm going to swap these. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to do that in a minute, and I'm going to use this one over here on the corner, because I swapped them. So again, double check, make sure you're going 8.5 by 8.25. I'm going to double check that. 8.5, so that's right. Go ahead and peel these off, and then lay that down. And it's not, the factory edge really won't show in terms of once you wrap the paper. The reason I like to put the factory edge on the outside is because I know it's straight. And my old arthritic hands don't cut the way they used to, so I like to rely on the factory cuts and take advantage of that. So I'm scooting this over, so I hope I'm in frame. But here, it's difficult to see, but I misplaced my white pen. But right here, I've got a little crosshair. This is the corner where I'm going to line everything up. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's meant to be a guide. This paper's going to get rolled around, so I'm going to eyeball that best I can. Okay, that's down. Once I get the other pieces down, I'm going to flip it over and we'll burnish. Okay, So now you can see I only ran the pencil mark to here, and that's because from this point on, I'm going to square off this piece. So I'm going to use my ruler here, and I'm going to start figuring out where this piece goes. Now, everybody has a slightly different technique. Eyeballing it is what most people do, but I'm a little bit fussy when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I actually built myself a little jig. So what does that jig do? Well, this is the chipboard scraps. And what I did was I glued, this one is longer just because it makes it easier to hold. I glued through 3 pieces together. So that is my guide. I want 3 times the width between these two as it is high. And that will allow this to open and close pretty freely and not bind against itself, creating an opportunity for cracking or tearing. So I use this as my guide. I push it in, keep my ruler straight on the bottom, push this across. I'm just dry checking, dry fitting. I want my my jig to be able to run up and down smoothly. So I'm right about here, and that looks about right. So I'm gonna flip this over. This is adhered down, so the ruler can push against that pretty hard. I'm gonna use this, press against it, press my bottom corners together. There you go. There we go. So I'm going to do the same thing for the last piece. Double check one more time. 8.5 by 11. Make sure I'm sitting it down in the right direction. Here's my ruler. Yes, that's 8.5. So I need to flip it. Again, I'm going to place my ruler here so that I've got a straight edge across the bottom that I can push against to keep these square. Use my jig, and I'm going to push hard and firm across the bottom and the jig so that this bottom corner is very tight. And then I'm going to lay down the rest of the chipboard. Oh, maybe. There we go. All right. So I'm going to flip it, and we're going to burnish. It's okay if you get a little dirt on this because this is actually going to get covered with designer paper. So the only parts that are really going to stick out are right around the edges where it folds over and right at the spine. So I didn't talk about it, but this is really critical too. And actually, if I was paying better attention, this seam would be in the middle here. So you never want that seam to land here. It just won't hold up. So when you have to use 2 pieces of paper, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll glue them together and then place the spine first and then line everything else off the spine so I can guarantee that this is in the back. So I want it in the back for a couple of reasons. One, I want it in a fixed position where it's not bending. And then I also want it at least far enough over, at least 1/8 of an inch over, so that I can cover it with designer paper. So it's less obvious. So hopefully you guys are learning from my mistakes as I go. Okay. So then the next thing is we're going to start folding the paper up, because all of this is going to come up around the chipboard. So I'm just running along the edges, pulling up. Not hard, just enough to get it to start bending. And it doesn't really want to bend this way because why? Because we went over this, because it's against the grain. So it's a little bit harder to bend it this way. It'll naturally want to bend this way. So So this part coming across the edge this way always comes across nice and easy. Going this way, it's a little bit of a struggle because you're working against the paper. So I like to fold it up around, start getting a feel for how much excess I have, because ultimately I like to trim this off before I fold it over. You don't have to, it gets covered either way, but I don't like the bulk. So I'm gonna fold this up, get a sense of where I want to trim this. And I just freeform it. It doesn't have to be straight. Like I said, it's gonna get covered. So what I'll do is I'll fold this up. I'll use my straight edge, draw another pencil line, and I'll either use an X-Acto knife or my scissors and just trim this down so it's just not quite as bulky, okay? All right, so that's that. I'll take my ruler and I'm gonna go ahead and trim this down. Again, I'm gonna go all the way out to the edge. I'm going to do that one more time across the back. And the width of this ruler, actually, I don't even really know, is about 1 1/10 inches. So it's not very wide. So some people will go wider, but this is wide enough. I typically like a tight mat. So even if I was putting designer paper on top of this, once I fold it over, it'll be very close to the edge. So you don't need a lot of excess, and it just makes it hard to work with. So just working with the paper, trying to get it to lay down. Once it has kind of a sense of where it wants to go, we're going to come back and we're going to add adhesive to the very outside edge of the black paper so that when we fold it over, it'll grab. So I typically do adhesive all the way around the edge of the chipboard again so that it's sticky on the edge closest to the wrap, and then put the other tape on the outside of the black so when I fold it over, it'll grab. All right, I'm going to use something a little thicker than usual. 5/8 is what I normally go with, but when I'm working on wrapping, since all of this gets covered, it's okay to be a little bit wider. And it's okay to go over your spacing. It's going to grab onto the paper eventually, so it's no big deal if it goes straight across. Save yourself a little time. Okay, there we go. And I don't know how people do it with the scissors because I get too tangled up. But it's always good to have a nice straight edge available. I'm going to burnish that, and then I'm going to come back around and lay my tape down on the black paper. Actually, I'm going to stop right there. Before I lay the tape down on the black, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess on the corners. And so I also use my jig for this. It's very frustrating when you cut too tight and then you go to wrap your paper and you've got a chipboard exposed. There's ways to cheat around that, which I have done, but I hate doing. So I like to make sure that I'd rather have too much than not enough. So again, I use the idea that the chipboard 3 chipboards thick as my guide to mark off my corners. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I try to do a 90 degree. Okay if I don't. So that's one corner. Use my chipboard. I'm not quite coordinated enough to do it hand over hand, so I have to keep rotating the book, unfortunately. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Okay, there's 2. So you can see how much distance there is here. It's probably a little too much, but you can always take off. You cannot add back. So I like to proceed with caution. I've made enough mistakes here that I've kind of learned my lesson. Better to have too much paper than to have to come back with a Sharpie and cover up the corner, or add a separate piece of paper to cover up the corner. Okay, so why do I cut the corner off before I lay the tape down? Well, because if I'm laying the tape down, what'll happen is I lay the tape down all the way to the corner. It's just kind of a waste, and it also makes it harder to cut through. So now that I have the corners off, I'm going to go back and lay my tape down right here on the edge, and then we'll remove all the backings, fold it over, and we're ready to go back to the hinge, finish that up, cover the inside, lay the hinge down, and then we can set all that aside and start working on the pages themselves, adding the pockets and the flaps. Okay. So there we go. So I was just talking with Julie, my partner, the other day, and we were talking about what are we going to work on next. So one of the more recent Graphic 45 collections to come out was the new DCE, which I know that's kind of an oxymoron. It's really not new. It's an old design, but it's a DCE now, is the Tropical Travelogue. So I'm actually started last night getting my creative juices flowing. I'll be working on a project for that, and this time I'm actually going to construct it on video for you guys, so you don't have to wait. When I do the walkthrough, I'm hoping to have the video available for you to use, so you don't have to wait. I didn't realize how popular this was going to be, so I didn't actually do a video when I was building the Imagine the first time, so I won't make that mistake again. I'll try to get them out much more timely. So yeah, so I'll be working on that as soon as this is done, and hopefully in a couple of weeks you guys will have a new project to take a look at. The other thing that we know is coming up very soon is I'm just bending this to make sure that it has enough reach, so that when I finally glue everything down on the inside, there's no tugging. And we can minimize any cracking or distortion. Just want to make sure it's really tight on the spine. It feels pretty good, pretty good. Okay, so now I'm going to take this off and fold it over. And I am going to start on the long edges where I'm working against the grain. I'm going to fold these in first. Then I'm going to test it a little more before I fold these last pieces in, okay? In fact, before I do that, I'm gonna burnish one more time. So anyways, back to what I was saying, the travelogue will be the next project. And then for those of you that don't know, we work with 2 other fairly popular, and I say that jokingly because they're incredibly popular designers. Ginger Rock, you may have heard of, and if you haven't, then what rock have you been under? And then also the lovely Miss Frances Long, and they'll be doing some design projects for us as well here in the very near future. I'm not sure what paper they're going to be working on, but you'll hear about it on their channels, My Sister's Scrapper and Your Book of Memories. So keep your eye out for those two gals on their channels. They do work for us as well. And then, of course, anything I do, because I'm actually the shop owner, along with Julie, will actually be posted on our channel. But when they do release a video, typically I give a shout out. So if you subscribe to www.scrapandcreate.com, you'll also be notified when they have release projects for us. So we hope you follow along. So yeah, so that'll be next. And then after that, it's that time of year. We are going to do something for the holidays. So it won't be long before we have, I'm just gonna fold this down on the corner here. I'm gonna fold this over, adhere this first, give myself a little bit of room, and then I'll come back and pull that off after I've folded it over, okay? Always start in the middle. Okay, press that into place. Feels pretty good. And then work from the center out. There we go. All right. Okay. All right. So yeah, Graphic 45 Christmas papers are coming out pretty quick. If you go to our site, in fact, you can pre-order the paper. But we will be having some projects designed specifically in the paper as well, so we are anxious to get those going and to get those in and available for you to enjoy. Okay, we'll flip it. Again, I'm going on the long sides first. The reason I do that is this is a little bit tougher to work with. It is going against the grain. I want to get this down and secure before I work on the ends that are a little bit easier. Also, once I get this down and secured, I want to move it back and forth a few times to make sure whatever wiggle room is required is worked into the paper before I adhere the ends down. Okay. All right. Here's my handy dandy pick. So hopefully this is a good pace. If it's too slow, too fast, please leave me comments. I just want this to be a good experience for everybody. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. I worked in corporate America for 35 years. I'm not sure I have feelings anymore. So just be as blunt as possible, and I will try to accommodate everyone, everyone's comments, and then make these a better flow for you moving forward. Okay. All right. So something else I want to talk about a little is we, Julie and I, since we're still pretty new, we are doing some retreats, and we did one, and we're getting ready to do a second one in the third week of October here in California in San Clemente. And that information for that retreat, that tour, unfortunately, is available on our website at www.scrapandcreate.com. We had a ton of fun. They're typically small. They're not these gigantic engagements, which I don't find to be a lot of fun. I prefer it to be smaller, more intimate. We had a lot of good feedback on the venue. It's fairly small in San Clemente. Everything is, you can wheel your stuff straight from the parking lot right into the room, which makes it super easy if you're crafting for the weekend. We do make and takes. We have a shop. It'll be a lot of fun. And the most exciting thing is Ginger Rop will be joining us again in October. She's going to be doing 2 projects, which she's working on designing right now. So she'll be at our retreat, and we would love to meet some of you guys. So So again, check that out at www.scrapandcreate.com. There is on the home page, right at the top, there is a menu item called retreats, and it'll take you straight to the details on the retreat in terms of the cost, location, dates. Okay, I'm going back on the corners, and I'm just tucking that in as tight as possible before I fold it over. So you can see I could have gone tighter, but like I said, I hate to have to come back and cover that with a Sharpie if I wind up short. So some of you might be a little more practiced at that, or be braver. I'm just going to tuck that in as tight as possible before I fold it over and adhere it to the tape. Okay. From the middle out. Now these are sticking out a little bit more than I like, so I'm either going to come through and trim or glue those down, but I'm not going to do it right now. I'm going to wait. I'm in my office. Hopefully my head's not in the shot, and I only get good light during the morning, so my light's starting to go on me. So I might come back and do work on that when I have a little bit better lighting. Okay, fold it. Okay, we're going to burnish from the center out. Okay, so we're making progress. So hopefully you've all followed along, and we now all have the skin for our mini album. Okay, not bad. All right, so I've pre-cut. Okay, now we're going to work on the hinge, and I want to point out to anybody who had pulled and maybe printed the cut and score instructions that the instructions that I had originally posted online were for a 5-page mini album, not a 4-page. So the score lines are off, and I apologize for that. It's been updated. And I have the new score measurements here, and so I'm going to run through those, and then we're going to go ahead and put the hinge together and attach the hinge to the album cover, and then go ahead and line the inside, and then we'll be done with the book and this video, and then the next video we'll start with all the fun stuff, all the layering of the designer papers, and also placement of magnets, flaps, and folds. So we're going to start at 2 3/4, and then we're going to score every 1/2 inch to 8 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and run through those. 2 3/4, 3 1/4, 3 3/4, 4 1/4, 4 3/4, 5 1/4, 5 3/4, 6 1/4, 6 3/4, 7 1/4, 7 3/4, 8 1/4. And that should give you all the score lines you need, and you can even see I pre-folded these to give you the mountains for 4 pocket pages. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start adding the tape, and again doing my best to stay in frame when I'm actually sitting down and working. I can't see what's going on. I did preview some of the work I did yesterday, and I'll try to make adjustments so that I'm not falling off the top of the video for the efforts that I'm working on today. Hope everybody's having a good morning. I actually didn't catch that mistake on the score lines for the hinge until I looked at the video yesterday and realized I had five mountains for 5 pages. So I apologize to anybody who had to waste tape or paper. I'll do my best to avoid doing that in the future. Okay, so we're gonna put tape on both sides of the mountain piece, and I'm going to show that to you a little bit on the side. So what we're going to do is put the tape there. We're going to pinch these together, and that will become the hinge for each one of the pocket pages. So I just want to point out that my tape placement, I try to go as close to the edge as possible on one side, and then as close to possible to the actual valley so that I have adhesive going from this score line to this score line. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get through these, and then we will peel the tape, stick it down, move to the next step. Okay, I'm excited to get started on the second video. So a little bit about myself. I'm from San Diego. I've lived here my whole life. I just started scrapbooking again, probably in the last year. And my neighbor and I have been scrapping together for off and on for nearly 20 years. And we decided late last year that she and I would go into business. And so we started this small business, Scrap and Create. And mostly we sell paper, but we do sell some other staples. Our major line is Graphic 45, although we've been trying to expand a little bit. And we now carry a brand called Stamperia, which is a European brand, which is really, really nice paper. If you like Graphic 45 and the quality and texture of the paper, you will like Stamperia. It is a much milder, more muted set of colors. At least so far, that's been my experience with the paper. So it's much softer. It's great for wedding albums, baby albums, stuff like that. But it's really, like I said, really nice paper. I've only done one project with it so far, but I really like it. And that video is already up too if you want to take a look at the walkthrough. So, and the price of the paper is pretty reasonable, especially since it's coming overseas. So, okay, so I'm going to start peeling off with my handy dandy pick, peeling off the tape, and then we're going to pinch these together. And then once that's done, I like to dry fit the pages to make sure everything's going to fit before I put my final tape on the outside. And I'm hopeful, you know, I didn't really think that through, but I'm hopeful when I'm done, all my ink marks are going to be covered up. If not, I might have to go back through with a Sharpie and kind of cover them up. Just in case you're curious, I mark these with a white jelly roll. It helps me keep track of where things are on the paper. I used to use pencil, but on black it's so hard to see with these old eyeballs. So I like the jelly roll. It shows up really easily. Unfortunately, it is permanent. So, but for the purpose of the videos, I like it because it really pops out for you guys. Might not be something I would do on a personal project, or at least I'd make sure that all my markings were in the center of the page and going to be covered with something. But that was a little hard to do on the Hinge because I only had a ½ inch to work with. Okay, so we're almost done. I'll get these two off. And I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier, but like I said, Julie and I went into business in January of this year. It's been pretty exciting. We've been having a lot of fun. And we, in addition to selling online at www.scrap and then the letter N and then create.com, we also do retreats. And if you go to our website on the homepage, there's a tab that you can click on for the retreat to get details on price, location, duration. We're getting ready to have another one at the end of October, and we are very excited. This week we talked with Ginger Ropp, and she was at our very first retreat, and she will be joining us for our second retreat, and we're very excited about that. Ginger will be there the whole duration, and she will do 2 projects with us that you can sign up for. The projects have not been designed yet, so we're waiting to hear back from her, but the price and the projects will be posted on our website, and then you can sign up for the retreat and then secure a classroom seat if you're interested in doing a class with Ginger Ropp, which she's wildly popular, I'm sure. You all know that. Okay, so these are done. So the next step is I'm going to go put tape all over the back of this, because this is actually going to get adhered to the inside of the book. So I'm going to work on that next. And then we're going to tag it down. And like I said, we're going to call it for this effort. And this will be filed as an 8x8 mini album base because it doesn't have any of the fancy flaps, folds, magnet placement, or anything else. It's just your basic 8x8 pocket page album. And I will probably wind up using this base in this video over and over again, and then adding the details as I design new albums. So might be a good idea to bookmark, although if I do use a video again, it'll always be, there'll be a link in the description of the YouTube saying that it's which videos to use for the tutorial. Okay, so you'll be able to link to this directly or indirectly through, oh, out of tape, or indirectly through the design that I actually created with it. So for example, this will be, there'll be a link under the walkthrough of Imagine, but there'll also be an independent direct link just under the 8x8 mini album base. Well, hopefully that makes sense to all of you YouTubers. Okay, almost done. I'm excited to get to the next part. So, oh, I'm out of tape again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna have to take a break and find some tape, so hang on. I've got some big fat tape that I'm gonna go ahead and use. You can use full sheets. I have trouble working with that. I wind up feeling a little bit like a cat with my paws all over everything and nothing where it should be. So I tend to want to use the rolls. You can also use your ATG gun. Again, as a left-hander, it's really hard for me to see the placement of the tape. And by the way, if there's any left-handers out there that have a left-handed ATG, by all means, let me know. I've been looking and I haven't been able to locate one because it is much more economical to use an ATG gun than to burn through these rolls of tape. And having said that, this tape is also available on our site if you guys need any score tape. We have score tape, magnets, designer papers, inspiration, information about our retreats. Okay. So I will let you know that the retreat is here in California. It's in an area called San Clemente, which isn't far from my home, but far enough that I can't run home every night, which is kind of nice for the 16-year-old. Otherwise, I'd be running them around somewhere. So that'll be, like I said, the end of October, and we would love to have you join us. It's a great little venue. It's not very far from the beach. It's right next to a huge outlet mall. And just over the hill is the beach, so it's really quite a nice area. Although I find when I go, I don't really get out of the scrap room. As a host, you don't really get as much flexibility, but there are things to do other than scrap in the area, so that makes it kind of nice. One of the other nice features about that location is you can actually roll your craft straight from the parking lot right into our craft room. So it's really no muss, no fuss. You park within 25 feet of the door of the craft room and unpack your car, set yourself up in the room and be done with it, and not have to haul it back and forth from your room to the craft room or deal with any stairs. So it's pretty nice in that regard. Kind of a small venue. It's really set up for about 40, 45 max, which I like as well. I don't like the big, giant 200 people crafts. I feel like they get too loud, and I don't really spend time talking to and meeting new people when it's in a smaller venue. By the time you leave, you feel like you know everybody, and I like that. So I hope to see some of you there. Okay, so we're all done with that. And I want to point out that yesterday, before when I was putting the album together, that's when I realized I had done the hinge for 5 pages and not 4, but unfortunately not before I'd glued it down. So I had to pick it back up, and I did that without damaging too much of this, but I'm going to lay down the new one, but that's why it looks kind of ugly. I have to stand up and lean over this, and I might actually block some of your view to try to get it straight. So one of the things I like to do before I lay it down is validate that I have a square angle here, because you want to lay this down as straight as possible. Because if you have it slightly turned, what happens when you apply all your pages is your pages are going to kind of cascade down. So if you want to make sure that your pages go on the hinge straight, but also that the hinge goes on the book straight, so that you have a nice, neat pages that lay down and behave like you expect, very square to the cover. Okay, so not difficult, a little bit tedious. Take your time. It is really hard to pull it back up once you put it down, as I discovered yesterday. I'm gonna have to shift slightly because my light in here is coming from a window to my left and creating quite a shadow for me. So another trick that I do, and I haven't done it in here, is oftentimes I will measure this, and this is actually 7 7/8 is the size of the hinge itself from top to bottom. Go ahead and measure that out and put a slight pale pencil mark to help guide you so that you know you're getting it in straight. Today I'm going to eyeball it, but having said that, it's not really something I recommend. So there's a couple of things that could make it crooked. One, you lay it down crooked. Two, your spine is not square to your cover in the first place. Let's see, that's slightly off. And then lastly, you could actually have folded your mountain and valley slightly crooked, which is not a hard thing to do when you're doing an accordion fold. Okay, this looks pretty good. Actually, I'm too far away from that seam. I gotta shift again because the light is just so bad in here. I'm gonna try it this way where I can see both edges. Much better. I can see that much better. Okay, and from top to bottom you want it centered as much as possible, but if you have to go one direction or the other, I tend to put the weight toward the bottom of the book. That's how it's going to naturally want to sit anyway, so why fight it? Okay, we're down. That is that. I'm committed, so I'm going to go ahead and push this down, and then I'm going to work this into the hinge of the book here. You want this down as tight as possible. We're going to put a finished piece on top of it, and we really don't want any tension here. So I'm going to work this in. And I always work from the inside out, because if I need some give, it needs to be coming from this direction, not from the hinges themselves. And in a minute, when I'm done, I'm going to actually go through and burnish the inside of each one of these, but not before I score and work this. Okay. All right, well, I'm pleased with that. It turned out actually quite a bit better than my first attempt with the 5-page hinge. So again, I apologize for anybody who wasted tape and paper on that. I will do my best not to make those mistakes in the future. If you're just tuning in, you may not know, but this is my first tutorial. So I am looking for lots of feedback from you guys on level of detail, speed, clarity of direction, whether I'm chatting too much, not enough. I'm putting banners in as I'm editing the video, including the cut instructions, so you don't have to go back and forth to the directions in the video. So I'll take some feedback on that as well. Is it printed big enough? Is it bold enough? And do I leave the banner up too long, not long enough? Anything like that would be helpful. And then the second video that I put together with the actual Imagine details, I will try to incorporate all that feedback and look for new feedback. Okay, thanks everyone, I appreciate it. And I want to give a shout out to Denise, who had actually sent me early on, before I started this tutorial, a mistake I had made on page 5, cut instructions. I had, the cut was right, measurements were right. I had the score lines wrong. So I have adjusted the cut instructions on YouTube, and page 5 has now been updated. So if you've previously printed that out, go back and look at page 5. I have made some alterations on the score lines. And then also, just yesterday I added the new cut lines for the 4-page mini album. It was for 5, so that's been updated. I'm not clever enough to figure out how to line out the old instructions and put in the new, so you just have to trust that I'm updating that as fast as I can. Okay, so now the next piece of paper is going to line the inside front and back covers, just to cover, to go ahead and cover the chipboard. It's really not necessary because we are going to lay yet another piece of paper down here. That's going to be a designer piece of paper. In fact, I already have it cut and sitting here. That's going to lay on top of it. So it's really not necessary. I do it because I like this smooth finish, and I don't really want my designer paper laying on top of a mitered corner. It's just not quite as clean. So I lay this down, and then my designer paper will lay flat on this, and it won't have a mitered corner behind it. Very small detail, but those are the kind of things that I look for when I'm building an album and when I'm buying an album. And I think other people do as well. Okay, so again, this is 8 1/4 by 8. So you'll need 2 of these, 8 1/4 by 8. I'm gonna write that down because I can't remember a thing. That's kind of my thing. So 8 1/4 by 8, and you'll need 2 of these. Okay, so here's my first one. I went ahead and cut the second one, and I'm ready to lay it down. I'm not going to do that right now because I just ran out of tape. I'm going to get some tape, lay this down, set this whole book aside. So the bones for the 8 by 8 mini album are complete. It is the book, the hinge, and then our 4 pages. So I'm going to set the book and the hinge aside. And again, this is it here, just the liners haven't been laid down yet. And we are going to start our next video with these 4 pocket pages. We're going to do all of the extra flaps, magnets, and add all that detail. And then when we're finished, we'll go back and put it inside the book and then finish the book cover. Okay? I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I look forward to hearing your comments, and hopefully this was easy enough to follow. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. I haven't actually placed any paper down here, so we're going to go ahead and do that right now. And then we're going to put in our pocket pages. So I need to measure that real quick. Because this is not a pocket page, it's a little bit larger than the 8 by 8 finished pocket page. So I'm going to go ahead and custom measure these 2 pieces. I'm going to go from the score line here next to the spine to the edge, and it is 8 1/2 by 8 1/4. So that is roughly what I'm going to cut. I like a real tight mat. Get my paper out. I need 2 sheets. Okay, let me trim those down real quick. So I'm going to go, it was 8 1/2, so I'm going to go 8 3/8 by 8 1/8. I'm going to lay that down, see how I like it. Is that the right direction? Is it too tight? It's pretty tight. So this is 8 1/8 by 8 3/8. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. I'll also run a banner. So this is 8 1/8 by 8 3/8. And you're going to need 2 of these. So I'm going to trim that second one up right now. 8 1/8 right. All right, let's see, that's sideways. Go ahead and lay this one down. Looks pretty good. We are going to cover that with designer paper. And you don't have to line it. You can actually lay your designer paper right on top of this, but I don't like my designer paper to have this little fold in it, or this mitered corner showing through the page, and it actually lays nice and flat if you do this. Okay, so now we'll set that aside. I'm going to come back and I'm going to add my adhesive to this, and we're going to go ahead and stick those down. Get those out of the way. Now, I showed you my score tape, and here it is. I mislaid it. Here it is. So I'm standing right now, but I'm getting ready to sit down, but I wanted to spend the first few minutes standing so I can make sure I'm staying in frame, and it looks like I'm doing a pretty good job. I want to apologize to everybody for how long it's taken me to get this video out, but it is actually my second tutorial. The first one was the base, and that was super easy because there's not multiple steps. And when I went to start recording the video for this tutorial, I realized that my design process, the way I actually design and build albums, isn't very conducive to tutorials. So I've had to rethink how I'm teaching this a couple of times, and I've had a few false starts. But in my opinion, hopefully it'll be an improvement, because the first few times it just started confusing me, and I'm the one that made the album. So I thought, well, we're gonna have to do this a different way. So that's what we're doing today. So this is now my third attempt to get this out. And I think, it kind of came to me last night while I was trying to fall asleep, I think this will work for pretty much everybody. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and add adhesives. You can add glue or tape, whichever you prefer. This is a flat page that doesn't really get much motion, so I'm not too picky about what kind of adhesives you use. I'm gonna burnish that one more time. And then I'm gonna lay it down. And already this feels better because I'm making some progress. I feel like we get to actually glue something down today. So I do want to mention I'm doing something a little unique in this tutorial, because I have a customer, a very special customer, who likes to take our samples and remake them. So I try to do some of this stuff with temporary tape so I can deconstruct it and reconstruct it. She has she's been working on some memory exercises and sequencing, and so I can give her these albums with some instructions, and then she can reconstruct them, and that helps her with her short-term memory and some of her processing challenges. So it's a good exercise for her. It's a good way for us to do something with the second album rather than hang on to it. We don't really need two of them. But it does mean that some of the stuff that I do is going to seem a little odd because I'm not putting it down with permanent tape. But I will point out when I'm doing that so that you know that for your purposes, you need to be using score tape. Okay, I know that's a little strange, but she's just a sweetheart. And when she asked me if I could do this, I said, absolutely, I can. And she really enjoys it. So, just a lovely, lovely lady. So I'm hoping to get this finished for two reasons. I want to get the video out there, but I also want to get her her next kit to work on, so that she has something to help her with those processing skills. So, okay. I also want to thank everybody who gave me feedback. All my feedback was so awesome. I really appreciate it. It sounds like I was keeping my banners up long enough, and people were able to put the book together pretty easily, and it wasn't too long. But again, I am definitely open to critical feedback, so that so these always get better. Okay, put my ATG down, and then okay, I'm at the point now where I have to sit down. My back is already starting to bother me, so I'm going to sit down and do my best to try to stay in frame. is just wrapped around itself. I'm sort of ATG gun impaired. Some people just don't have any trouble with these. I seem to have the hardest time. And again, I'm certain it's because I can't really see whether the tape is being laid down until the very end. Somebody please make a left-handed ATG gun. I think they used to make them, but you can't buy them anymore. I've searched high and low, even on the used sites, but if anybody does know of one, please, by all means, let me know. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and peel the back off. And get some of these pages stuck down. It's another warm day here in San Diego, California. Everything that you see, not so much the cardstock, because we're still trying to find a good cardstock supplier, but all the designer paper that you see is available on Scrap and Create. And that's www.scrap.create.com. I'm gonna turn this sideways. So the way I like a tight edge and I like it to be even. So the way I do that is I try to line up two of the corners and then get the distance on the side of these two corners equal. And then I think the inside is a little bit more forgiving. So this is going to be the side that's most exposed. So that is the side that I try to focus on, making sure is very even on both sides. And I turned the album so that I can see both corners at the same time. And I'm still working on studio lighting. I tried to do some videos last night, but I just can't do it without the natural light. So hopefully I'll get that resolved soon, and then you won't have to wait as long for videos, is my hope. Okay. All right, so that's down and it looks good. So we're gonna recap that real quick. And my numbers are upside down, so I'll turn it right side up. We're gonna need 2 of the 8 1/4 by 8 8 1/8 by 8 3/8 to cover the inside panels, or you can just leave them because you're going to wind up putting designer paper down on top of it. Okay, so this is what's actually going to go on the inside and the back, but I'm not going to lay those down right now. I'm going to go back, put in the pocket pages and start adding the flaps to the pocket pages. We'll go back at the very end and do our designer. So with that, we are going to go to our first pocket page, and I've put notes all over everything for me and for the lady I'm going to give the kit to. I have to take this off. I started to put this down yesterday, and I want to back up a little bit. Actually, I need to leave that one on. So this is page 1. So page 1 is going to slip onto this hinge. Before I do that, I'm going to cover up my markings here with a Sharpie. I should have actually folded it inside out, but I was trying to do it so that you guys could see what was going on throughout the process. So for me, I'm just going to cover that up with some marker. If I'm really unhappy with it after I put my pocket page in, I might put a designer strip in here to further cover that. For the most part, I try to put all my markings in a location that I know is going to be covered with designer paper. But for this hinge, that was a little challenging because I only had a 1/2 inch to work with. Okay, so now we need to put some tape adhesive on either side. This is a fairly interactive piece, so you don't want to go cheap on the tape. Use good score tape. We're going to place tape on either side. I like to use 3 3/8, and I'm looking around and I notice I don't have it. So I'm gonna have to pause, go to the other room and see if I've got some tape in there. So hang tight, be right back. Okay everyone, I'm back. Well, c'est la vie, I can't seem to find that 3/8, which is perfect to go on these 1/2 inch hinges. So I'm gonna have to use my smaller score tape, which is 1/4 inch, and it'll do, but it's always nice to get a little bit more adhesive on the hinge itself. So what's important here? Stay as close to the top of the hinge as you can, And if I had 3/8, it would pretty much fit perfectly from the top of the hinge to just enough distance. I'm peeking to make sure I can see what I'm pointing at. Let me get a pointer here. Just enough distance, I keep getting in my own light, sorry, to stay off that hinge, because it's gonna need to move freely back and forth. And if you have tape here, it's not that big of a deal. It's really kind of hard to pick it off later, but you'll find that when you're flipping your pages, it makes this squeak, 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 squeak noise. And it'll want to catch any interactive flaps that you have that are close to the edge of your actual page panel. So try to stay away from that score line on both sides, but you do need tape on both sides. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Let's stop chatting for a second so I can make some progress. I apologize for the shadows, but I just can't seem to get the lighting right in here. I can tell when I'm flipping this, I'm getting in my own light. All right. Turn it sideways because it's easier for me to tear the score tape this way. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and lay that down on all of these. You can do the same. Then we're gonna attach our first page. Now, having told you about my experience of trying to put this tutorial together, if I had it to do over again, what I'm doing right now I would have included in the first video because it really is part of the base book. But I thought there was some changes I was going to want to make to the pocket page that would be easier to accomplish not inside the book, but having gone through this a couple of times now and trying to decide how to actually teach it, that's probably not true. So I would have gone ahead and finished the book, which would have included the pocket pages attached to the hinge, the liners in here, and then called it a day on the first video. Now once we get those pocket pages placed, and I'll remind you when I get there, probably going to go ahead and edit the other video and add this to it, and maybe somehow chop this video off. So that this becomes really just the video that's all about the Imagine pieces. What makes this album unique in terms of the that design. So that anybody could build up an 8x8 book and then go to the second video and do the Imagine customizations. Okay? All right, with that, just about done. We're gonna burnish all this down. This is really important to burnish because these pages get tugged on, pulled on, flipped. You don't want your tape scooting around on you. Not a hard step, but a little bit tedious. So if you're not in the mood, set it aside and come back to this later, because this is all about getting these pages in straight, which will have a huge impact on the quality of your book. It won't really change much whether or not the pages stay in and last, but it really has an impact on the overall aesthetic. If you don't get your pages in straight, they'll start to fan out. When your book is laying on its side with the pages, you'll see that the pages just sort of slip to the side. So it's really important to get the tape down well and then to get your page slipped on correctly. All right, so enough of that lecture. I'm going to peel a little bit of the top off here, and I'm going to fold it so that when I slip the pocket on, I can still reach the tab. And that's kind of a similar technique that I had used earlier when I made the pocket pages themselves. Okay, so we're going to open the pocket page. I'm looking to see, can you see what I'm doing? I'm going to slip it over this hinge on one end, and then down around the other. I'm not ready to take the adhesive off because if you make a mistake, it's really hard to tug on these. So it's very snug, but it fits. Okay, here I go. Now what I'm going to focus on is where the page is relative to that hinge. I'm going to tack it down temporarily so it's not flopping around, and it'll stay in place. while I check it out, flipping it both ways. And what I'm looking for is the distance between the top of the pocket page and the album. The bottom of the pocket page and the album. Is the distance equal? And is it straight? When I look across here, does it look like it's tilted one way or the other? It looks pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. So with that, I am going to go ahead and work on the next one. I'm only going to temporarily adhere one part of this. I want to get all my pages in, lay them on top of each other, make sure they line up and they're not twisted before I actually pull a tab on the rest of these. Okay. I've got some extra adhesive on this, but just kind of ignore that. Same drill. We're going to slip it over the hinge, bring it down, wiggle it a little to get it on. There we go. I can't say enough about the lighting. It's just horrible. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to tap that on. I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to check that that's flush with the page that I laid ahead of it. Top and bottom, looking good. And a lot of what I'm doing right now, most of the work really goes into laying that hinge down straight in the first place. Although, if you lay the hinge down crooked, which happens to the best of us, this is where you would tilt the page up or down to try to square it back with the album. What do I mean by that? What I mean is I might place one end of this page very tight to the score while leaving the other one a little bit higher up to straighten it out, to sort of compensate for if the hinge is crooked. Another thing, I like a tight hinge. Some people give themselves a little more room to play with, but I don't want my pages moving around. Typically when I slip it on the hinge, I kind of pull it down so that the top of the hinge is at the top of this pocket page and it's kind of resting there. And that's kind of my cheat for getting the pages in straight. And I haven't pressed that down yet. I want to lay it down. Now see, you can see here, you can see that it's not lined up with the page ahead of it. So there's a couple of things that could have happened. Could be the hinge, could be the pocket page is not square. It doesn't really matter, but because I haven't completely glued it down, I have room to wiggle it on this hinge before I permanently affix it to make it square, which is what I just did. So that is one of the reasons why you want to take your time placing. And nope, that's not very good. I'm going to try that again. And it's just this teeny tiny corner that's adhered, so I've got some room to move. Just use my bone folder to lift it up so that it'll float freely. I'll turn it sideways because I can see the top and bottom a little bit better. I'm going to push it into place, back it up against, I'll press that down. I think I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm going to double check it. Oh, it still wants to float a little bit down. Oh, I can see. Now I'm looking at it from the side. I can see. It looks pretty good. Okay, so that's good. So now we're going to do the last one. And then we'll go back, make sure they're lined up again, and then we're going to pull the rest of the tape out on one side. Go back and do it one more time on the flip side. And then we'll be done. So this is page 7, just double checking. I've got my page marked here. Remember, all of these are originally 8.5 by 8. We scored 1/2 inch, folded it over, and this is an 8 by 8 pocket page. Okay, slipping that over the top and bottom. I'm going to turn it sideways so that I can make sure it's lined up. I'm going to push all my pages down on the bottom, push it down up here, and from here to here, and from here to here, it all looks pretty darn good. I'm pretty happy with that. So it's impossible to be perfect, but this is pretty close. All right, so I am going to push that down. So that is the beginning. Now I'm going to go back through and peel the tape off I'm double checking to see if I can see myself, and it looks like I'm still in frame. I'm going to use my pick tool underneath to grab the tape. And since I know this is square, I'm not even going to move it. I'm just going to tack it down. Okay, that's one side down. Side two down. Go back, double check. Anything shifted, put it back. Flip the page, repeat. Okay, be careful with your pick tool because it is sharp, at least mine is, and I've been known to actually poke a hole in the hinge of the paper. Okay, I'm using my left hand on top of the page to keep it from shifting while I pull the tape out. All right. That is our second one. We're going to go back over here. This side's much easier because I left a little pull tab. Just yank it out and press it down. I actually bumped this page so it shifted, so I'm going to have to go back and validate that these are straight, which, as you can see, doesn't take much effort. This one shifted as well. Okay. So that tilted down just a little. I had some planning tape left there from last night, so I'll move that, and that'll help it move more freely. Square, square, square. Love it, love it, love it. Page 6 is down. So now we're ready for page 4. Again, I'm holding the page in place with my left hand, using my pick tool to get a handle on the tape. And pulling it through. And no magic here. There's a bazillion tutorials on what I'm showing you here. Like I said, this is really, it's just some planning tape that I had left behind. Really not unique. This is pretty much the base album. Our next steps will be kind of where we add the bells and whistles. Okay, last page. So I had pre-glued a couple of pages down last night, so just ignore this. We're going to come back to it. If you see that, don't worry, and I'm not going to skip it. I had just done something last night and then was rethinking how to present it to you guys. So pull that tape out. Last chance to check around before you place it. Looks good. I'll press that down, flip the page, pull my tab, and voila, we are done. Okay, so now all our base pages are in. Picking up some of my mess. So you should have a mini album with your 8x8 pocket pages installed. Let's go through and burnish everything down. Okay, and you can see going through the process and taking your time, you wind up with pretty straight edge across the bottom, which is nice. It looks very clean. As we layer on the designer paper and the pages go and lay back down, it becomes more and more obvious if you're not square.